Hello, friends. Welcome to Return the Remnant Ministry. In today's episode, we're going to do part 2 of our 3-part series on Revelation. A few days back, we did part 1, which is just a Revelation overview. And today, we're going to try and focus a little bit on the structure of the book of Revelation and how, if we break it down, how it could be read in more of a sequential order. You can say timeline if you want, but there's really only one timeline that's important, and we'll get to that in this episode. And then this should be fairly short today. What's going to be the real kicker is going to be part 3 when I try and tie in stuff from the Old Testament, the Tanakh, that the disciples and the Apostle Paul were able to draw from. How did Paul understand 2 Thessalonians 2:4 when he wrote there about the man of perdition? What scriptures was he drawing from, speaking of the antichrist? And we know we can go into the book of Daniel and see that, but there's several other scriptures within the Old Testament that the children of Israel, or at least those living in Jerusalem in the first century, even before the expectation of Mashiach, they understood a lot of the end of days scriptures, like in Joel and in Zephaniah and parts of Zechariah, Ezekiel, Daniel, places like that, Isaiah. So that's going to be a while before I get that teaching done. But for today, we're going to just do part 2, which is the sequence. And you can see here this picture that I have is an artist rendering or drawing of the red crossing, the red crossing back in the Exodus account, and this mighty deliverance that God gave to the children of Israel, and the destruction that happened on Pharaoh and his army. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. So I think for the most part, most Christians, most born-again believers who have studied Revelation a little bit, I think most of us can agree on the following: that if you're reading the book of Revelation, we know that chapter 1 begins it. There's got to be a starting point. And we know a few chapters later, we get into this basic overview of what's going to transpire in the future. Now, some people may believe that the seals have already been opened. I'm of the opinion that they have not been broken yet. So chapter 6 begins with these seals that are open, that only Yeshua, he's the only one worthy to open these seals. Later, we get into chapter 8, and then now these trumpets or these judgments begin from heaven, with the angels blowing the trumpets on the earth, of things that were going to happen on the earth. And then we get into another area where, when those trumpets are done, we basically get into the wrath of God. The wrath of Elohim begins on the wicked who are on the earth, who are left on the earth at that time. And then towards the end of the book, chapter 20, 21, 22, we get into the millennial kingdom, and then a new heaven, a new earth. The 8th day begins. The Father dwells with us. The Son dwells with us, and it's eternal life. And so we can pretty much all agree on that, on that subject matter, that layout. And not everybody will. And I understand there's, of all the denominations of churches out there, that there are many people that are even opposed to reading Revelation. So, but anyway, I think what I'm trying to get at here is most people that study Revelation can agree that there's a beginning of Revelation that starts. There's sometime in the future, the seals begin. When they're ended, the trumpets begin. And when they're ended, then the vials of wrath of God are poured out. And then there's a future kingdom followed by eternity. So my goal here today is to try and piece together all the other chapters in Revelation based not only on events, but details related to those events in sequential order. And I think this is a problem many of us have. Maybe it's not even a problem. It's just how we're reading the text. A lot of times, we want to read with this Greek mindset, this linear mindset. When we open up a book, whatever book we're reading, especially if it's a fiction book, we're reading a timeline sometimes of what's happening, and we know in the beginning everything begins, and in the end everything ends. But a lot of times in the Bible, there's a lot of things in between that get juggled here and there. And a lot of us who have gone through the Torah portions can understand, and we can glean from sometimes how the Lord is trying to teach us certain events. Like, for instance, in the book of Numbers, there's a couple chapters there where the sin of Baal Peor happens, where the children of Israel get sucked up with the Midianites, and God pours out his wrath on his people. And then we get into some things that God wants to share with us, some teachings. And then a few chapters later, he tells Moses, now go strike the Midianites. Well, in our Greek Western mindset thinking, that chapter that happened 5-6 chapters later should have been the next chapter after God judged Israel for the sin of Baal Peor. Hey, now go after the Midianites. But he's trying to teach us something between those chapters of the sin of Baal Peor, and then go after the Midianites and attack them. And it's the same way here that we're going to see, I think, in Revelation. And I think a lot of times too, people are reading the book of Revelation, and we're reading subject matter and events, or we're just reading events, and then a little bit later we're starting to see details that seem disconnected because they're in a different chapter. And so I'm hoping I can plug these things in a little bit and help the flow of this book of Revelation, so it makes a little bit more sense. If we take a look, the Bible kind of gives us a similar pattern, and there's other places, but I want to use this as a good example. The whole in the Torah, we have in the book of Exodus, we have the children of Israel being oppressed in the land of Egypt. You know, Jacob and his family, they come to Goshen, which is a place of diaspora. It's just like today. You know, many of us know what our inheritance is, and we are not in our inheritance. We're living in other lands around the world. But as you can see, when you read in the book of Exodus, life was good for a while. In the end of Genesis and in the beginning of Exodus, not good. Because once Jacob died, and then Joseph died, and Jacob's sons died, that we read in Exodus chapter 1, verse 8, a new Pharaoh, or a new king, who I believe is very symbolic of the antichrist. And it says that this king did not know Joseph. And what did he do? He oppressed and afflicted the Israelites with hard labor. And I think this has something to do with the seals of Revelation leading up to some tribulation, if you will. And then we see a little bit later in Exodus that Yahweh now calls upon Moshe, and also Moshe's brother Aaron, who were alive during this time period. And God used those two people during that particular time to go to Pharaoh, to tell Pharaoh to let Yah's people go. And during the plagues of Egypt, these guys, these two witnesses, performed many signs, many judgments and plagues upon Pharaoh's kingdom. And you can equate that symbolically to Mystery Babylon, or the beast kingdom, if you will. So they did these signs at the command of Yahweh. And I believe that what they were doing during this time, yes, they weren't 7 trumpets, but there were 10 judgments, if you will, upon Pharaoh and upon the land. And to me, this is very symbolic of the trumpets, or the judgments that we read about in Revelation. Then we have, when the children of Israel finally leave Egypt, there's this final last deal here. You could almost say it's a Gog of Magog battle. but for the sake of argument, I'm just going to read this. But the splitting of the sea is the final deliverance of the children of Israel as they pass through it on dry ground, right before the wrath of God, or the wrath of Elohim, was poured out on Pharaoh's army and totally destroyed them. And just my opinion here, but I think this is very symbolic of the rapture of the saints who made it through the tribulation, and then the wrath of God commenced on the wicked in Revelation. We know that he destroys them. He destroyed Pharaoh's army in one swoop, and we read about in Revelation that he deals with the wicked, and I believe it's very similar. There's this deliverance. First the children of Israel are taken out of the picture, if you will. They're not raptured up into heaven, but they're taken out of the picture and held in safety while God's wrath is being poured out on Pharaoh and his army, symbolic of the antichrist and the beast system. We also know that Ezekiel tells us that there is going to be a future Exodus. And I'm just going to read a few verses in here, but Ezekiel 20 is a good place to go. Verse 33, as surely as I live, declares Yahweh Tsebaot, I will reign over you with a mighty hand and with an outstretched arm with outpoured wrath. I will bring you from the nations and gather you from the countries where you have been scattered, with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm and with outpoured wrath. I will bring you into the wilderness of the nations, and there, face to face, I will execute judgment upon you, as I judge your ancestors in the wilderness of the land of Egypt, so I will judge you, declares Yahweh Tsebaot. I will take note of you as you pass under my rod, and I will bring you into the bond of the covenant. I will purge you out of those who revolt and rebel against me. Although I will bring them out of the land where they are living, yet they will not enter the land of Israel. Then you will know that I am Yahweh. This has not happened yet. This is something that's going to happen in the future, and I think soon in the future. How soon, I don't know. But this is just one of many places that talks about how God is going to bring us out of the nations and gather us. And so basically a future Exodus, if you will, much larger than the Exodus of the children of Israel coming out of Egypt. So I'm going to give you kind of my disclaimer. I could have probably said it to you earlier. As we go through this, just know that this is my opinion. There's several pastors out there that are very dogmatic on certain things when it comes to prophecy and revelation. As I say several times, I think that end time revelation is very fluid as we get more information and understanding and current events and what he downloads upon us. My position on this could definitely and probably will change, but it's just where I'm at now. And that's kind of why I wanted to share it with you today. And, as you go through this with me, if there are questions or comments, or you have suggestions or ideas on what I'm talking about today, please put your input in, and we can certainly go through and look at that. And, that's why I try to put this channel together, so we can learn and grow together and raise awareness as we get closer to the end. So what did John on the island of Patmos see when Yeshua revealed to John the things that were going to happen in the future? We have to keep in mind that John was in the spirit, in what I would call the heavenly domain, which is outside of the earthly time domain. I mean, if you're the Heavenly Father who has no time, sometimes we're living in a time domain. We're mortal. He is immortal. And so things are going to look different probably to someone looking outside of a time domain to try and grasp what John is seeing in the spirit. Also keep in mind that John is trying to write what he saw or what he heard of things that are going to happen in the future. He didn't know how far in the future, but this was almost 2,000 years ago that he's getting this vision. And I'm sure it would be very, very hard to describe what he saw in full detail. He probably saw things he never seen before, and he's trying to use his understanding back in the first century to try and describe something 2,000 years in the future. Another key point to keep in mind here when reading Revelation is that there's scenes in heaven transcend time. So their timing and sequence should be determined by contextual clues rather than by a strict timeline chart. And so you're going to see some key points in here about when John says, then I saw, or then I heard, there's other frames here where it's like there's a snippet of time and then he sees something else. Or it's like when I did the Revelation series, how he's looking at this big mural painting, or a painting that has depicting a whole bunch of scenes on it. And he's looking at one scene, and then he says, and I looked and I saw this scene, and they may not be exactly the same, and they could be out of order, but it's all part of the same painting of what's going to happen. Another key point to bring up is that when John says, then I saw, or then I looked, or then I heard, or you're going to read in here where it says after this, or after these things. And as I just said, these are all key breaks in the narrative, signaling something else is now about to happen. And they can be a shift in what is seen or heard, not necessarily a change in the time period. It can go either way. And that's what makes it confusing. So these are some of the areas where John heard or John saw, or after this. These are some key breaks that you might want to consider looking at when you have some time. Might want to write them down, just look at them. But I believe in the sequence, Revelation chapter 1 is kind of the intro. Chapter 2 and 3 deal with the churches, not only in John's day, but in a future time. We have the throne room, and we have who Yeshua is. These are all descriptors of him. Then we get into the first 6 seals of Revelation, followed by chapter 7, when he says, John says, chapter 7, verse 1, after this. After what? After these 6 seals, he sees something. And I believe it's a break in time. He sees another sequence of things. And what he sees here is verses 1 through 8, which are the sealing of the 144,000. Now we'll get to, I got to be careful how I do this, because I have it in a kind of a strict order, and there's been times where I get off course here, and I don't want to get off track. So then we get into Revelation 8, which is the 7th seal. Go through my Bible as we go along. So the 7th seal followed by the first 4 trumpets. Chapter 9 gets into trumpet 5 and 6, and then Revelation 10 is talking about the 7 thunders, etc., etc. there. Then we get into some funky chapters, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But if you were reading this based on a timeline or a sequence of events, I don't like saying the word timeline. The only time I'm going to tell you about a timeline is something that's going to come up in a little bit that should perk your ears. That's the main timeline that we should always be looking at. But we have to understand the sequences till we get to that point, and then we know the timeline. Anyway, next step we get is to Revelation 14. In Revelation 14 are these proclamations that happen, followed by, I believe it's the 7th trumpet. And this is where I believe the saints now are taken to be with the Lord. I'll go back and I'll share with you. So a real key pivoting chapter, when your first key pivoting chapter is chapter 7. Chapter 7, John starts by saying after this, after the first 6 seals, he sees the sealing of the 144,000, nothing about them going through the tribulation. Then we get down here where I have in Revelation 14 and then Revelation 7, 9 through 17, we see another after this. After what? I believe here there's a time gap between what he saw, what John saw with the sealing of the 144,000, and now him seeing all these people, and he's having trouble understanding who these people are, and he's asking the angel, and then one of the elders, in verse 13 it says, one of the elders addressed me, John, saying, "Who are these robed in white, and where have they come from?" I said to him, "Sir, you are the one that knows." Then he said to me, "These are they who have come out of the great ordeal, or the great tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb." So I believe there's a distinction between the 144,000 and the great multitude, the saints that we read about in Revelation 12:17, Revelation 14:12. And again, I believe, well, I got to be careful here. I'm going to get off track. I can't do that. So we see Revelation 1-5, chapter 6, the first 6 seals, followed by there's this sealing of the 144,000. Then we get in basically to the trumpets. In Revelation 14, there's these proclamations by angels and the seventh trumpet. And then we see where it says in Revelation 14, starting in verse 14, "Then I looked, and there was a white cloud, and seated on the cloud was one like the Son of Man, with a golden crown on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand." I think we can all agree that's Jesus, Yeshua, HaMashiach. "Another angel came out of the temple, calling with a loud voice to the one who sat on the cloud, 'Use your sickle and reap, for the hour to reap has come, because the harvest of the earth is fully ripe.' So the one who sat on the cloud swung his sickle over the earth, and the earth was reaped. And then the other angel comes out and reaps the grapes, and the grapes go through the winepress of the wrath of God." So there's a distinction here between these two harvests here in chapter 14. So I believe this Revelation 14, this reaping that Yeshua does, are the saints that John saw back in Revelation chapter 7, 9-17. All right, let's continue. Then we have Revelation 15 and 16, which is basically the vials of wrath. And then 17 comes in, but I don't believe it's in order, and I'll share why in a minute. Then we get into Revelation 18, 19, 20, 21, and 22, where there's basically the Gog and Magog. Well, we have now the destruction of Mystery Babylon. You know, they're wailing over Mystery Babylon. The kings come from the east and meet in Jerusalem in the land, getting ready to fight Yeshua and the saints. 19 and 20, 21, 22 deals with Gog Magog number 1 battle. Gog Magog it will follow by the millennial reign of Yeshua. That's Ezekiel 39. Satan is now bound in prison for 1,000 years. The Antichrist and false prophet are thrown to the lake of fire. Then after that 1,000 years, Satan is released. Then he deceives the nations again. Then we get Gog Magog number 2, which is Ezekiel 38. And then God pours out his wrath and destroys them all. And then Yeshua, the Father, I had to go back and look again. But Satan is now taken, and he is now thrown into the lake of fire for all eternity. And then we get into Revelation, 21, 22. There's also that great white throne judgment in that area too, in those last chapters. And then we have eternal life with the Father and with Yeshua. So now, these are some of the out of sequence texts. As I said before, Revelation 7, 9-17, we have a break there where John says, after this, after what? After the sealing of 144,000, sometime after that, in the future, he now sees these saints who have come out of the great tribulation. Well, that the seals are not the great tribulation. Now, some people may think that seal 5 is the great tribulation, but it's not. And maybe one day, maybe I'll spend some extensive time on that. One thing, okay, so Revelation 7, 9 through 17. That's one out of sequence text. The second one is Revelation 11, where John gets a deep look at the two witnesses that will be in Jerusalem for 1,260 days, prophesying against the antichrist and the false prophet. Then we read Revelation 12. Revelation 12 talks about the tribulation saints. And there's some other things in there too. I'm not going to get into that. If you go back and look at my Revelation teaching, I go into specific details of what's going on there in Revelation 12 and how that relates to Revelation 7. Then we get into, and that also, the tribulation of the saints take 1,260 days. Then we have Revelation 13. So 11, 12, and 13 are all details of the events that happen right in here. 11, 12, and 13 are all events that happen during this timeline, or during this sequence. And we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. And then the last one that's not on this sequential chart, if you will, or sequential progression here, is chapter 17, Mystery Babylon. It's definitely out of context, and I'll try and explain that here in a minute. So these texts here, as I said before, in Revelation 7, 9 through 17, in verse 9, John states that after this, meaning after some point in time, after John saw the 144,000, at a future point in time, now he's looking and he's seeing the saints who have come out of the tribulation. Revelation 11 are details of what the two witnesses will be doing for 1,260 days. Revelation 12 are details of the fall of Satan and his angels who are now on earth, who first went after the 144,000 but were unable to destroy them. So they now turn their attention to hunting down the remnant, which takes place for 1,260 days. Revelation 13 are details of the Antichrist's reign when he's at full power for 42 months, or if you look at 30-day months, 1,260 days. All three of these texts are all connected by the 1,260 days. And this, my friends, is the timeline that we have to look at. Once the Antichrist comes into Jerusalem, I believe he's going to go up on the Temple Mount. I believe that there will already be work in progress of a temple being built. And the reason why I say that is we have contextual clues, past contextual clues, to confirm that point. If you go into Ezra chapter 2 and 3, I believe, you can see how they started the Tamid offering, the daily burnt offering, while they were constructing the temple. And in today's world, with all the technology and machinery we have, it would take no time at all to put blocks of stone. You could have a tent for a while, just like when David housed the Ark of the Covenant in a tent. You can have something as simple as that. But I believe that there will be a stone structure, some cut stone structure that will be put up there. This is why we read so much about the merchants of the earth flowing into end days Jerusalem, end days Mystery Babylon, with all this gold, silver, wood, and stone, and all this stuff. It's all for building the temple. It's all this, everything's flowing in there. But this is what we need to be keying on more than anything else. We're going to go through a lot of birth pains, if you will, and we're going to be going through the seals. A lot of things are going to be happening. This is going to be, I believe, the time when the Antichrist starts to make his move to deceive others and get to a point where he can assume full power. And then there's going to be a point in time, all these events, the war in heaven, as we read about in Revelation 6, I want you to just hear what it says here. Revelation 6, verse 12. When he, Yeshua, opened the sixth seal, I looked, and there came a great earthquake. The sun became black as sackcloth. The full moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth as the fig tree drops its winter fruit when shaken by a gale. I believe that verse right there is connected. That event is connected to Revelation 12, where stars are not going to come onto the earth, something like stars, and there's descriptions where stars are angels. Stars represent angels, and I believe that war in heaven, the veil in the heaven is going to be ripped open, and Satan and his angels are going to come down, and when they come down, the Antichrist is at that same time is going to assume full power, and at that very same time, the two witnesses will be on the scene. All these events, I believe, are going to happen at the same time. And this will be the kickoff. This will be the start of the 1260 days. Now, could I be wrong? Absolutely. This is just where I'm at right now as I read Revelation and comb over the scriptures. Then we have another out of place text, Revelation 17. And I believe what's being shown here, these are details of the height of power of Mystery Babylon, end days Jerusalem. This is when the Antichrist is going to take his seat and assume full power. This is going to happen before the coming destruction of her. And I have it after the rapture of the saints, Revelation 14. I don't know. It could be earlier than that. It could be during the trumpets. There could be some things going on that are going to destroy parts of Mystery Babylon. I'm not 100% sure. But I can tell you for a fact, in my opinion, I shouldn't say for a fact, but I really believe that before the bowls or vials of wrath, of Yahweh's wrath, are poured out on her, she will be in a position where, she's at full power and the glory of all the kingdoms of the earth. But once that wrath starts, that's when she's going to be destroyed for sure. And very interesting, when you get some time, well, you know what? I'll read it. If you look at Revelation 17:3, it says, so he carried John away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. Okay? Sat on the beast. This is very much identical to Revelation 13. At the height of the Antichrist power, then the dragon took a stand on the seashore. Okay, verse 1. I saw a beast rising out of the sea having 10 horns and 7 heads. 10 horns and 7 heads. And on its horns were 10 diadems, and on its heads were blasphemous names. And this is when the dragon, Satan, gives him the authority. And I believe, again, that it's all tied in. Revelation 11, 12, and 13 are all these details after the 6th seal is opened that happen. I believe they all come together at the same time. So if we take a look at again, the book of Revelation, this is where I'm at with this. Again, my disclaimer is, you know what, another week, tomorrow, a year from now, it may be different as more and more information comes. But again, Revelation 1 through 5 happens, and then Revelation 6, the first 6 seals. At seal 6, this begins the 1260 days where the war on the saints, Revelation 12. The Antichrist takes his full reign. He starts his full reign. And also the two witnesses come they're at Jerusalem at that same time. And I also believe that the 144,000 are raptured at this time because Satan can't get to them, and he turns his attention on the rest of Israel and her seed. Revelation 12. Then we get to, again, Revelation 8, 9, and 10. And then in Revelation 14, we get an event that happens, and the details of that event are listed in Revelation 7, 9 through 17. This is at the seventh trumpet. I believe it'll be on Yom Teruah, where the remnant saints are now raptured. They are now harvested. Somewhere in that Revelation 14, maybe even earlier than that, John gets to see a description of Mystery Babylon in its full power before Yah's wrath is poured out on it. And then we have the wrath of Yah, Revelation 15 and 16, those bowls of wrath. And then you have the end of the book. So hopefully you got something out of it. I know this is going to take me a while to try and put together Old Testament Tanakh scriptures that I can try and point to within the book of Revelation. There is a lot of them, and I know I won't get them all, but I think what I'll do is focus on the ones that are most important. So I hope and pray that today was a blessing to you and you got something out of this. Maybe it made things a little bit more clear. Again, if you've got any questions or comments, you want to have a little bit of input in this, please put it down in the description below. If you can hit that like bell or thumbs up, I guess that would be great. As I'm trying to grow this channel, and I'm hoping that this channel can be a sounding board for believers in the end time. So, any questions, comments? Please hit them down below. Other than that, may you have a blessed week. Shalom.